Hey guys, welcome to Knockers on the Bottom. I'm your host, Jay Mill. Jay Miller, if you like. Just wanted to get into some things with the preseason game. But before I jump on that, I just want to let you guys know Deron Bland actually has suffered a fracture to his foot. He's going to be out about 6 to 8 weeks. So that kind of sucks. Was really looking forward to seeing him and Trayvon Diggs on the field together at the same time. Looks like we won't get that till about mid October now. If we're lucky, maybe early November. If we're unlucky, so that's going to affect some of the things the Cowboys do with the roster. Now, I have heard that people do think it's going to be on the shorter end, that it's going to be closer to 6 weeks than 8 weeks. But if the Cowboys are, they have some tough roster decisions to make. So putting him on PUP, which would take him out for the first 7 weeks of the season, and then he would be eligible to come off PUP and then practice for a couple of weeks, and then he'd be good to go. I kind of would probably play it that way. The Cowboys usually like to play these things a little more aggressively, so my thought is they're probably going to carry him on the active roster, and then kind of just play it week by week and see what happens. And all in all, I mean, I understand it's the NFL. There's only 17 games, so by them playing it that way, PUP will basically put him out for about 9 weeks, roughly. If you play it the regular way, maybe you get him back in 7 or 8, and maybe that's the difference between making a playoff appearance and not making a playoff appearance. So I understand, the way they probably are going to play it, just because they want to make sure that they have him for the maximum amount of games possible. So I'll keep you up to date on that stuff. But as far as from the game, I think the biggest story is the people who didn't play. Cooper Beebe didn't play, which means he's probably won that starting center job. Tyler Guyton didn't play, but we know he's won that left tackle job. No Overshown, no Clark. Clark is back practicing, but and we have 2 weeks to the regular season, so he will be ready for week one most likely. Overshown, I don't know if he'll necessarily be ready for week one. It seems like the hip pointers affected him a little bit more than originally planned. Kendricks didn't practice, but we didn't think he would. I mean, I'm sorry, Kendricks didn't play, but we knew he wasn't going to play. Mozzie Smith didn't play, which kind of lets me know that the Cowboys think of him more along the lines of a starter. For example, Jordan Phillips played, right? And Carl Lawson played. And that probably had more to do with their lateness to getting to the Cowboys as opposed to where the Cowboys think they sit in the hierarchy. But it is interesting that those two played, but no Osa Odigizua, no Mozzie Smith. So I expect coming out there week one, those are your two starting defensive tackles. Unless the Browns line up in a heavy set, maybe Osa, doesn't play that very first snap, and maybe one of the other guys comes in, whether it's Linval Joseph or whether it's Jordan Phillips, to kind of add some beef in the middle if the Browns come out in a heavy run set. But for the most part, those are going to be your starters. You didn't see any Malik Hooker, as you haven't seen all season long, all preseason long. You haven't seen any Donovan Wilson, no Trayvon Diggs, of course, no Jalen Tolbert, no Jalen Brooks. So in my 53-man roster projection, I did have Jalen Brooks on the 53-man roster, but I basically had him as my fourth receiver because Kevontae Turpin is more of a fifth receiver / special teams person. So I had him as my fourth receiver, but it looks like he's pretty much a shoe-in to make the roster. No Hunter Lipke, which means he's pretty much a shoe-in to make the roster. No Ezekiel Elliott, and I think that's by design by the Cowboys. They don't want people seeing him take his carries and kind of over analyzing how he looks or how he doesn't look. But that being said, after the performance in this game of Royce Freeman and Deuce Vaughn, I honestly think Ezekiel Elliott shouldn't even be on the roster. But that's neither here nor there. He's going to make it. The Cowboys are obviously, Jerry Jones loves him, so that's all he needs. He's got the owner's cosign. He's going to be there. But if it was my 53-man roster, Ezekiel Elliott would be, he would be cut and someone else would be taking that spot. And speaking of 53-man roster, I think Flournoy did enough to make the Cowboys keep a 6 wide receiver. I think Deuce Vaughn and Royce Freeman both did enough to make the Cowboys either A, have to get creative. And by creative, I mean the Cowboys always do these funny things when they make their final 53-man roster where they like cut their punter and then they cut their special teams person, like CJ Goodwin. They cut the long snapper and they use those 3 extra spots to hold on to guys that they feel, hey, if we cut this guy, he might be picked up by someone else. I think you're going to see some of that to make sure you can hold on to at least Deuce Vaughn, because I think you're going to go 6, but maybe they're doing that to hold on to Flournoy. Maybe they're doing that to hold on to Freeman. Maybe they're doing that to hold on to Buddy Johnson, because he continues to flash and made several nice plays today as well. So I think they're going to have some tough situations there. Excuse me. Also, I think Woods is going to make it a little difficult on them. I thought he was playing linebacker earlier. I don't know why, but he's a safety. I think he's going to make it a little difficult on them to cut Woods down as well. He had a couple of nice tackles, a couple of nice plays today. Speaking of tackles and plays that were nice, we're going to talk about somebody who wasn't nice. Trey Lance had a very, very up and down day. I thought he was a lot better in the first half than he was in the second half. He had basically what you've seen from him early on in training camp. He kind of reverted back to that, which is sometimes he makes very good throws, very on-time throws, very precise, and you see the talent. You see why the 49ers took him 3rd overall. You see why the Cowboys traded a 4th-round pick to bring him in for some development. But on the flip side, you also had some plays. I'm not talking about the first interception. Tony Jefferson actually made a very nice play on the sideline to get that interception. So even though, yes, that is on Trey Lance, he's the quarterback, he threw that ball. So technically the interception is on him. And that was a very, very, very nice play by the defender. However, the interception he threw in the end zone where he kind of got to the top of his route, the top of his drop, double clutched the ball, moved to the right a little bit, double clutched it again, decided I was going to run, then pulled back, then decided to try to fire it into a tight window. That's absolutely his fault. That's not something that's going to be long-term successful in the NFL. There's a reason why most of the time you're getting rid of the ball in a couple of seconds, and when you get down in that red zone area, everything is compressed. There's more bodies in a smaller area. It's much harder to hold on to the ball and then throw into tight coverage and expect success. But he did have, to my point, he did have an awesome throw on a fade to Flournoy in the red zone as well to score a touchdown. So I know the Cowboys, again, talking about 53-man roster projections, the Cowboys are going to keep all 3 quarterbacks. That's just what they're going to do. That's Jerry Jones made that trade for Trey Lance. He went ahead and pretty much did it without anybody else's cosign, or at least that's the word. So I expect Trey Lance to absolutely be on the roster. As far as offensive linemen, I think I have the same amount. Some people were talking about Josh Ball being on the final 53-man roster. Some people were talking about Matt Waletzko being on the final 53-man roster. So it could be either one of those 2 guys, but pretty much for the most part, I feel like the projection I had is pretty much what we're going to have. On the defensive line, I had to shuffle around some things because of the addition of Phillips, of the addition of Lawson, of the addition of Joseph. So now I think the Dallas Cowboys, I had 8 before because Micah Parsons kind of plays a little end, plays a little linebacker, so you kind of have 9, with that flexibility. So now I think the Cowboys carry 9, and with Micah Parsons' flexibility, have kind of 10. I also have them carrying Buddy Johnson as a linebacker, which I mentioned a little bit earlier, especially with the injury to DeMarvion Overshown. I think the Cowboys are going to need a little bit more depth at linebacker in week 1. Not saying Buddy Johnson is going to get a bunch of snaps, but saying if that week 1 game comes on and something happens to Maris Leafau or something happens to Damone Clark or something happens to Eric Kendricks, you want somebody that's been there all this time. Now, I feel it's Buddy Johnson because he's young. He's been around for maybe 2 or 3 years. but he's pretty young, still learning, still ascending. But the Cowboys could also view it as Damian Wilson, only because he played for the Cowboys before. He also won a Super Bowl with the Kansas City Chiefs. So they could take a look at Damian Wilson and say, hey, we want Wilson to be the guy because of experience, and Buddy Johnson might end up being a practice squad guy that if that injury becomes long term, he can be elevated. So keep an eye out for one of those two. I still think my cornerbacks are pretty much the same after this game. I had Israel Mukwamu, had C.J. Goodwin, who's actually a special teams player, but his depth chart position is listed as corner. I had Trayvon Diggs, I had Deron Bland, I had Jordan Lewis, I had Kalen Carson. But I think with Deron Bland, we're going to figure this out because if the Cowboys carry him on the active roster, they have to carry him for 24 hours before they put him on any sort of injury designation. And then once that happens, then they can kind of take one of these other guys. But I know Hall also missed the game with an injury as well. And he was another one that has been flashing. I don't think Eric Scott's going to make the roster. I think they're going to be pretty much done with the Eric Scott experiment, pretty much, unless they bring him back on the practice squad. But I think if they cut him, because Dan Quinn was such a big fan of Eric Scott and now he's moved on as the coach of the Commanders, he'll probably put in a claim, pick him up, and that'll be the end of the Eric Scott experiment. I have my safeties exactly the same. I know Woods is going to make it difficult on them, but maybe by moving on from, the long snapper or the punter or the special teams ace, that allows them on that 24 hours that they have to have their 53-man roster set before they make any moves. Maybe that allows them to carry a Woods, a Deuce Vaughn, a Royce Freeman, a Ryan Flournoy, and then after that 24 hours, then they can start maneuvering some people around and figure out what they're going to do with the rest of everyone else. And CeeDee Lamb, if he doesn't report by the time they make those cuts, he stays on that did not report list, which doesn't count towards the 53-man roster. So essentially, they have an extra spot. So when you're talking about the CeeDee Lamb contract and looking to see if that's going to be done here in the next couple of days, I wouldn't think so because the Cowboys really don't have a reason to do it if they can carry that extra roster spot for 24 hours before they have to give CeeDee Lamb a contract and then he comes in and then it makes the roster even tougher to shuffle. So for them, it's probably smarter just to make the cuts on Tuesday. On the 24th hour Wednesday, okay, now we start talking with CeeDee Lamb and getting that roster spot shored up. But that was pretty much it. Trey Lance, 5 interceptions. Deuce Vaughn had a good rushing day. Brock Hoffman, he blocked pretty well in the game. There was some bad plays, some good plays, but everything that you expect from a final preseason game for any team, let alone the Dallas Cowboys. But if you like the video, hit the like button, subscribe. If there's anything specific that you want me to cover, put it in the comments below. You can hit me up on Twitter at JMillIYL. I'm sorry, I did it again. At JMillerIYL. That's JMiller if you like. You can also submit questions via email, knockersonthebottom@outlook.com. Again, that's knockersonthebottom@outlook.com. I'll take them on Twitter. I'll take them via email, put it into like a mailbag format, make it an episode. Hopefully we can make it a regular thing. But you guys have been great. Thank you for tuning in. This has been Knockers on the Bottom. I'm your host, Jay Mill. Jay Miller if you like. Peace.